There we go. Good morning, everybody. Nice to have you here. Contemporary Issues class. Come on in, Jan and Bob. Nice to have you here on December 19th. Another dry day in Colorado. But we're going to talk today about the year in review. Just thought we would do 2021, the highlights, and talk a little bit about the lessons that we've learned too. Get your input also. But first I want to do our usual announcements, and so folks on Zoom, please mute yourself in the lower left corner of your screen. But nice to have you here. We're so glad to have this technical ability, and we have this little device in the center of our room here called the Owl, which swirls around and picks up our pictures and our audio. And we are recording this for future playback on the internet. We try to record and then have and send out videos of classes that folks have missed, and they enjoy doing that. And be nice to each other in our comments today. We're going to talk a little about politics, of course, from the left and the right. And so we ask everybody to be considerate and understand we have folks here from both sides of the political spectrum too. So with that, I also want to welcome two new folks to our class today visiting. Mike is his second week here at St. Andrew, and Rosalinda, your third week here. So welcome, and please feel free to drop in anytime and visit us, because we talk about lots of different things, and folks enjoy some and they don't want to come to some. So and we try and do that from a Christian perspective too. Since we're a church group, we try and look at these current issues from a Christian perspective. So today, other announcements. Anything going on? How's everybody doing with family in town?
A very special birthday happened this week.
Oh, who's that? Jesus?
Along with Jim Watson's birthday was this past week. Very
That's the
special.
same. Yeah. Jim is 95. Going on 55. You know, that's right.
Steve, Ron and I had our 48th wedding anniversary.
Oh, happy anniversary.
That's wonderful.
And we still like each other.
Well, friends, that's great.
Yeah.
That's an achievement too, of course. Okay, good. Of course, everybody knows about things coming up, all the Christmas services on Friday. Is it Friday? Yeah, that's Christmas Eve.
And Thursday.
And Thursday is a
Pre-Eve.
pre-Eve Christmas service, and a blue Christmas service, so a quieter one, all kinds of options going on here. So there's always a lot to choose from. Okay, any other thoughts before we go? Okay, well, I'm gonna, hopefully my Word document's gonna come up here, and we will start in with January. Year in review, and of course we probably recognize, a lot of us recognize this photo, and a lot of folks of course think the most important issue of the most important event of the year started off on January 6th with the supporters of Donald Trump attacking the US Capitol, disrupting the certification of the 2020 president.
Steve, would you put on your screen share, please?
Right, I just,
Screen share.
Yeah, we're not seeing it.
I will in just a second. Let me hit the screen share.
Where'd it go?
Where did it go? There it is. Thank you, Linda. There, can you see it now? Okay, good. So there's the picture that a lot of us recognize, the folks scaling the Capitol walls. And as you remember, probably 5 people died in this riot, including a police officer who was hit in the head, I think, wasn't it? with an object, and a woman who was shot and killed inside the Capitol by one of the Capitol officers. And the event is classified as a domestic terrorist attack and drew international condemnation. So of course, the lessons that came out of that, a lot of us thought this was something that would never happen in America. We were a country that was in agreement, everybody in agreement that this is how we operate with certifying elections. And of course, this group of folks wanted to get into the Capitol and stop the certification of Biden as the winner of the presidential election. So what do you all think? What are your thoughts as you look back on that on January 6th? Ron?
Pretty terrifying with January 6th because we've stepped to a new low level. When you start to say, it's one thing to be disappointed with the results of an election, but when you lose by 7 million votes and you then start to try to, without evidence, without any solid evidence, claiming in 5 or 6 states that the results were rigged.
Right.
Now we're stepping into a whole new ground, and to try to hold it up with some legal procedure to get Mike Pence to say, oh, no, the Chiefs lost that game. We want to throw away those 2 touchdowns. Now you're stepping in the bad area. And then even worse, when the House goes to do a investigation, when one whole party says, we don't even want to do an investigation. It's like the whole sanctuary collapsing in there today, and then saying, well, the builder's a friend of the church, let's not do an investigation. So we're in a dangerous territory I've never seen our democracy go into before. It's really.
It is a real challenge, as you've said, to our democracy, and a place where those of us who believe in the rule of law and election results need to pay close attention.
I've worked on two elections, and they haven't, in the news discussion of the election process, they haven't mentioned that in the election process, there are both Republicans and Democrats working together to put it on. And my experience is that, they do it in a friendly manner and a respectful manner. And there's no fraud in it. I haven't seen any fraud in it at all. And I don't know why they don't stress the fact that it's the Republicans and Democrats putting on the election. So one party doesn't have any advantage in the election process.
Well, to play the devil's advocate, of course, a lot of folks believe that some of those individual states were run by either Democrats or Republicans, and they did fraudulent things in their own favor. So, and there was no way to undo that. And so that's what fueled these folks on January 6th. They thought it was rigged and no other way to stop the fraud.
Yeah, well, from my perspective, Trump should have never run in the election. He said in June 2016 that if he didn't win the election, it was rigged. That's not someone who is going to accept the outcome of the election, which has been done throughout our history.
Right.
There's a peaceful transfer of power. The parties recognize that the other party won.
Transfer of power.
I'd like to ask, has anyone else in the class worked on an election, and what is your opinion of how they're conducted?
Linda has, Ron has.
Yeah, and one of the more absolute stunning things was when Trump placed the phone call to Georgia to a Republican
Yeah.
official
Right.
and said the famous, infamous phrase, find me another 11,800 votes.
Right.
That's like if I was accused of financial fraud and called my banker and said, find me $2 million more for my bank account, you know?
Yeah. Things we've not seen before in America. How are you, Jim? Jim, I thought you had your hand up.
I don't disagree with anything that's been said. I agree with Ron. There's another way of looking at it, however. And the other way of looking at it is that in spite of people who would tear our system down, that our system prevailed.
Yes.
And I think that's something to celebrate. I think history is filled with instances of people using violence and fear and all sorts of other poor tactics, bad tactics to seize power and to dominate and manipulate people who are unable to stand up to them. But our system worked,
Mhm.
our system, and it's still working.
Mhm.
In spite of a rush to judgment of those perpetrators, there has been a step-by-step orderly process, and it's ongoing. And I think we need to step back every once in a while and celebrate the fact that we have this system, and we need to support the system, and that the system is still working.
Well said.
That's good.
Yeah, Mike, go ahead.
I just wonder what people's perspective on, Paul's admonition in Romans to obey our governments. And they're putting extreme, obvious, and provable election fraud to the side. Do people feel that it was incumbent as Christians, which many of the people protesting involved in this would probably claim themselves to be devout Christians?
Yeah.
They bear responsibility for being more trusting and in the election process and in the will of our democracy? Or was this a violation in some way of their responsibilities as a Christian?
Good question. Good topic. We've talked about that in here before, a responsibility to follow the law, but then when you have unjust laws, Martin Luther King and nonviolent protests to try and change the laws. So it's a great topic. Very good. Okay. I know we could go, of course, the whole hour on this
Yeah.
one thing, and we want to move on and look at some other ones too. January 13 in Lyon, France, the first transplant of both arms and shoulders is performed on an Iceland patient in France. So there are quite a few things that happened this year that we didn't really hear about as progress marches on. January 20th, Joe Biden was inaugurated. Pardon me?
What was the result of that? I mean.
I didn't
was it
look up that one
successful?
any further, but just thought it looked like a milestone, another medical milestone. Dr. Bob, have you ever heard, and Jan, have you ever heard of such a thing?
No.
Uh-huh.
I heard about the facial transplant.
Yeah, facial transplant.
Yeah.
There's-
And shoulders, wow.
There's always new ones coming along. I don't remember much about the Joe Biden inauguration compared to the Trump inauguration, except there was the young black woman who was the poet that did a beautiful job. And she's had quite a career now since that a year ago. Another one that didn't get much publicity, a treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, the first legally binding international agreement to prohibit nuclear weapons comes into effect. But what did it really do? How can you really legally bind other countries when that's really more dependent on their own power, their own desire to take action?
Right.
Okay, February. This is a picture of the Wuhan lab, where we started talking about, did the pandemic really start from bats or was it from the Wuhan lab? So in February, we started to do that. But on February 1st was a coup d'etat in Myanmar, which took the president out of power and restored military rule, leading to widespread demonstrations. And of course, I remember folks mentioning this, saying, could this happen in America? Now that we've had a riot at our Capitol, what could happen if people who wanted to change our country convinced the military to back them? Could we start going down the road like a coup d'etat in third world countries? What do you think about that? What do you think is the likelihood just of that happening? That we could convince the military to back? Go ahead.
If we wouldn't have anything to eat, if everything was just going downhill,
Uh-huh.
people here would react just the same.
Uh-huh.
I think you're right.
I think in the US, there's a differs from a lot of countries in that our police and military forces don't keep us free. It's people's belief in and obedience to the rule of law.
Right.
And our democratic process that keeps us free. No military can keep you free if you don't have that level of trust, which feeds back on why it's so discouraging to see the Capitol rise, because it's endemic of, is that change? Are people losing confidence and trust? And that's what leads, to the dictatorships and coups and that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. Good point. January or February 9 was when the World Health Organization and China did an investigation into the source of the outbreak. And they concluded that it was extremely unlikely it came from the lab, and more likely a natural reservoir of the virus mutations in bats that caused it. But of course, since then, we've had a lot of questioning of that, and that was coming from Chinese officials too, so they would not want to admit to something too. February 19, the US officially rejoined the Paris Agreement 107 days after leaving, and of course, that was Biden restoring things that he thought were not done correctly in the Trump administration. And US became the first country to surpass 500 deaths from the virus, roughly a year at that point after things began shutting down.
Now it's 800,000.
Now it's 800,000, is that right, in America?
In February, it wasn't 500,000.
So you think what's on here was wrong?
Oh, this year, sorry. Yeah,
Earlier this year, 500,000.
yeah, take that back.
Global death toll surpassed 2.5 million at that point. In March, Pope Francis met with one of the Ayatollahs of Iraq, first ever meeting between a Pope and a Grand Ayatollah. So that was, for the Catholic Church, something they paid a lot of attention to. I didn't remember that particularly, but it was nice to see the Pope reaching out. He's what, Jan?
He's something else. I just think he is fabulous. I think he's a model for a pope.
A lot of folks do, but then there's, of course, those on the far left and that say he's not doing things fast enough. He's not actually changing the policy on gays and other things. So there's both sides looking at that too. Also in February, the Turkish president announced his country's withdrawal from a convention, the first country to do so on that. But of course, we've heard a lot more from him about authoritarian shutdown of his whole country. In fact, Vicki and I have a friend whose son left there because he was a professor in Turkey and he had to leave. He felt he was in danger of his life. And so he came back through and spent a night with us. And it was interesting to hear how they feel like they are really
Was he Turkish or is he American?
He was American, teaching at their
Oh,
university
okay.
there. And he felt like
Mhm.
anyone who was an academic or a opponent of Erdogan was in danger. And so a lot of academics left that country too. Israeli general elections take place, the fourth election in 2 years. So that turmoil was bubbling then. The large container ship in the world runs aground in the Suez Canal. We probably remember the picture of that thing stuck in the Suez Canal, even making it more of a problem with the supply chain issues.
So are there still pirates in this canal?
Pirates?
Pirates? There was, I don't know, it was a couple of years
Know about
ago,
that
they were
one, but-
talking about pirates.
They're around the world.
Yeah,
Okay.
Somalia and that area, yeah.
Oh,
Uh,
on the exit
the-
to the south.
I wondered about that too, and I was doing a little reading on that recently.
Okay.
And apparently the navies, various navies have really put a significant dent in
Okay.
the piracy, especially, we don't hear much about it.
They've tried to take over cruise ships.
You're probably thinking of the true movie Captain Phillips.
Yes.
Well, because we went through a long period there where the navies didn't get very adequately involved. And the merchant marine was having to, try to come up with private defense, and that using water cannons.
Yeah.
And that wasn't effective. They began patrolling now. Navies do a much better job of that now.
That's good.
Good to know.
You don't see people on cruise ships that are the security officers with machine guns. Okay. Kind of a surprising one that I thought, looking back in April, was Ukraine. Russia warns NATO against sending any more troops to aid Ukraine amid reports of a large Russian military buildup on its borders. So that isn't something that was just going on now this month that we've been hearing about. It started back in April. They have been, and maybe they say Russia's been held off from invading Ukraine because of the international attention on it. And maybe-
May I make a comment about ships? I've always been interested in ships. And recently I checked on the largest ship in the world and I was just astounded. It's just short of 500,000 tons.
Wow.
When you think about the ships in the Navy, an aircraft carrier may weigh up today up to 60,000 tons, something like that, or a battleship used to weigh around 35,000 tons. But this is a ship weighing just short of 500,000 tons and 1,500 feet long. That's just huge.
Cargo,
I think it was oil,
anchor.
Mhm.
Okay. Interesting. Thank you. Okay. And of course, this Russian incursion into these neighboring countries, they feel like they're justified because they used to be part of Russia. And there are still people in those countries that want to be part of Russia. And so that Russia is using that as an excuse for taking back these countries that split off.
Hitler used the same excuse.
Jim or Bob said Hitler used the same excuse. So we'll see what happened. Of course, Biden just this last week was warning Putin, if they take any action, there'll be severe consequences and we will be helping the NATO countries. Iran accused Israel of nuclear terrorism after Israel attacked an internal power system uranium enrichment plant. So it was, yes, back in April when Israel bombed and took out one of Iran's nuclear plants. And then in the Golf Masters tournament, first Japanese to ever win a golf tournament happened there. I remember that was quite a big deal in Japan. Yeah. And also in Japan, Japan's government approved the dumping of radioactive water from the Fukushima power plant into the Pacific Ocean over the course of 30 years with the full support of the Atomic Energy Agency. The decision was opposed by the nearby countries of China, South Korea, and Taiwan. This one, I'd like to ask our engineers
Yeah, I was
what
just
they
gonna say,
think
does
about
that
that.
sink?
I
or-
looked it up and it said that small amounts of radioactive water over time are not a contamination of the ocean.
So what do you think?
So what do you think, Ron?
Okay, I would agree. And we already have some natural uranium that gets into water streams. Even in Colorado, some of the streams have modest amounts of uranium and thorium running in them. Also, relative to the other contaminants going into the ocean, plastics, ships regularly washing their bilge water holds with flushing them into the oceans.
Sewage.
Those two sources far overwhelm this nuclear.
Pharmaceuticals are showing up in the oceans too.
Yeah,
Trace amounts of, yeah.
yeah.
So does
but
this radioactive stuff sink? Or is it, or you don't know? Okay,
Some does, some doesn't.
okay.
No, it doesn't necessarily.
It's just one more contaminant in the big cesspool of the oceans, huh?
So don't drink the
So does
water.
that mean that the fish shall not be eaten because they live in the
If you disperse it enough, you're okay.
Yeah, and it's gonna, they're doing it over in small amounts
Yeah.
over a 10-year period. They expect, it's not like they're gonna flush all of that contaminant
Yeah.
at once.
Also remember that acidic rain falling in Colorado streams in certain places has made some of the bottom feeding fish unedible. Largely mercury from coal-fired power plants falling into our lakes and streams.
Wow.
Don't eat, don't drink.
Careful what you eat or drink, okay?
So,
And then also in April was the, I think this is the Johnson & Johnson vaccine it's referring to that was paused over blood clots, if you remember. So we started taking the vaccines in March, roughly. And then they were tracking, of course, the effects of these too. Dr. Bob, you remember that blood clot issues?
Yes, and actually they are now not recommending J&J as a booster.
Just read that, yes. So the technology is changing as we go along on these boosters. And then also in April, scientists announced they successfully injected stem cells into embryos of monkeys, creating chimera embryos. Dr. Bob, what is it? Or Jan, what is that? Do you know what chimera embryos are? Is that a hybrid between a human and a monkey?
Well, it is a hybrid. Now, whether that's human and monkey or not, I don't know, but it's a hybrid species.
A hybrid species.
Interesting to watch.
So yes, so we're going backwards in evolution. in some ways.
I know.
It's too big for to discuss today. I know you're trying to get to this, but I'm just curious, has the group discussed the bioethics of some of these things extensively?
We talked about AI, didn't we?
What's that?
We talked about AI at one point.
Uh-huh.
I don't know. I
It's
don't know
been-
about bioethics.
it's
I
been a
think we
while,
talked
but-
about bioethics about the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, but we'll revisit that, Mike. That's a good one. Yeah, what are really the ethics of developing new species? And yes, and should we be doing that? Absolutely. NASA had a helicopter on Mars, performs the first powered flight on another planet in history on Mars. April 24th, the number of vaccinations administered worldwide exceeds 1 billion, but half of those are in the US, China, and India. So at that point, hardly any had been distributed to and given in those developing countries. And then we remember the Brexit discussions in the spring also. People protested about Brexit Some countries wanted to leave and some didn't. Oh, and then this was a Colombian city, protesters there, police violence because of increased taxes and healthcare reforms. So upheaval all across the world, of course. And then there was in May, yes, started really getting attention with the SpaceX tourism. SpaceX successfully flies, lands, and recovers their prototype for the first time after 4 unsuccessful previous attempts. They must have overcome that good, because now both of those companies are sending people into space. And then Israel-Palestine crisis. We remember, last spring, Israel flared up with the airstrikes against Hamas, and they began displacing Palestinians in the neighborhoods of East Jerusalem. And that continued for some time. Remember, with the rockets going back and forth. But that's the pattern, of course, in Israel, is it flares up and then stops for months and then flares up again. Also in May, China lands its rover on Mars, making China the 4th country to land a spacecraft on Mars and only 2nd to land a rover. I didn't even pay attention to that. Did you know that China had things on Mars?
Yeah, in fact,
They have quite a big space program.
yeah, in fact, they were the first ones to do 2 steps in one launch. They actually put an orbiter around Mars and the same mission sent a rover down. All the other nations, not too many, have done 2 steps. They first just put something in orbit, and then years later did the rover. China did it in 1 shot.
Wow.
So they don't get a lot of publicity about their space program, do they? I haven't really seen it.
The UAE just launched a mission too. I don't remember where that was. To.
United Arab Emirates.
Yeah, right.
Arab Emirates of all people. Yeah.
A lot going on up there and down here. And in the middle of May, the fighting continued between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Death toll exceeded 150. Airstrikes destroyed a high-rise office building in Gaza occupied by Associated Press. I remember that. They gave warning. They said, we're going to blow up your building, you get out. And so that angered a lot of people. And also in May, big media conglomerate bought another big media conglomerate, just consolidating a lot of the media ownership in just a few hands. It just was a continuing trend that is bad for America. In my
A
opinion.
quick question, similar to the other one I asked about.
Sure.
Has the group discussed the Christian ethics associated with Israel and Palestinian relationships and their attacks?
We
That's-
have.
That's something.
We have, and we've had a lot of folks who are really sympathetic to the Palestinians and think the Israeli government goes too far. And a
So
lot of
is
what
that
it does.
usually what the group does? Is usually tee up one major topic to discuss?
Mhm.
This is a review of the entire year, but most of the time you just have one topic to discuss.
Yes.
Yeah, got it.
Yes. Yes, we have. We're sympathetic to both sides. That's a really tough topic. Israel's got a lot of,
Very much so.
has to protect itself, and yet neither side makes much progress in toward peace. Coup d'etat in Mali removes their president and their prime minister and restores military rule, leading to the country being suspended from their West African organizations. And then end of May, Shell became the first company to be legally mandated to align its carbon emissions with the Paris Climate Accord, following a landmark court ruling in the Netherlands. So
What does that mean?
I guess that means a court could require an oil company to cut its carbon emissions. But how can it really enforce that? I think there's a lot of back and forth like that. We'll see a little more about the climate in the coming months here too. Hope I'm not going too fast. If I am, slow me down. If you want to say anything, just,
We've got a lot of.
Yeah, you gotta move it along here.
Yeah.
and I got this from Wikipedia too. It was the only source I found that really had it chronologically. Lots of other ones focused on topics they liked, but this was a good chronological look.
Well, I just offer on the Shell thing is that even though sometimes they don't have the legal ability to mandate compliance with ESG issues or any other issue, the European Union, for example, can definitely encourage the right behavior because they can ban certain products from being sold in the EU, which out of
Yeah.
rational self-interest, many times companies will standardize and fall in line with EU policies and regulations, even though there's no legal underpinning to force compliance.
Like they've also fined Facebook and other companies for violating their rules in Europe. In June, Israeli presidential election held, and they removed Netanyahu from power and started a rotation government that came into effect after 11 days. Boy, the Israelis just continue to have upheaval in their government structure. They can't seem to get a combined government that helps stability there. The G7 agreed on a global minimum corporate tax of 15%, intended to prevent tax avoidance by some of the world's biggest multinationals. So trying to stop country or companies from going where they can find really low taxes. June 13th, Netanyahu, who was the longest serving prime minister, was officially voted out of office. And then lesser names took over, which we haven't heard much about.
Is that still in effect? Is he still-
Yes, he's out.
Oh.
And somebody else, other guys are in trying to form a
Far right is, that's not who it was,
He's all right.
far right government.
yeah. It's still a far right, yeah.
Yep. And then also in June, China sends up 3 astronauts to occupy the space station, the Chinese first space station. So is it just their own built space station?
Yes,
Huh. I thought there was only an international space station.
there's both.
There's both.
Yeah.
Okay. And then in June, Brazil became the second country that surpassed 500,000 deaths from the virus. Remember that, how Brazil was close to collapse. Remember their hospitals were overrun, their economy was collapsing.
And yet Bolsonaro is still notoriously anti-vaxxer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Their president, yes, yes,
Right.
an anti-vaxxer. And then one of the most interesting, I thought, was the Surfside condominium collapse was on June 24th, in the middle of the night. Remember that there was still like black and white footage of that thing was coming down.
4 people.
Immediately, 100 people that were eventually pulled out of there. 1 survivor was pulled from the wreckage while 35 others were evacuated from an uncollapsed section. And then all of the after effects of finding out that the HOA, the condo HOA, had put off required maintenance on that building for years. They couldn't agree. They thought it was too expensive. And so resulted in that tragedy.
If anything positive has come out of that, they're looking at other builders and buildings in that area
Yeah.
now, so.
Yeah, but what about all over the world? Aren't there thousands of those kind of buildings that are on the edge of collapse? And what's been the follow through on that? It was a good lesson, but did we really follow through?
But wasn't that a
Well,
condominium structure?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
One of the problems that you have in that is that the HOA is representing the homeowner. But it doesn't have, it operates at the will of the homeowner. It's a little bit like taxes, when they say, well, the building really needs some work and we're gonna have to assess you $5,000. People say, oh, no, let's vote against it.
That's what happened, exactly. They didn't want-
And so you run into a problem with the condominium type of ownership. That is it able to be responsible? If it's a single owner, then that's one thing.
But shouldn't the city have also had inspectors that condemned that building and moved people out before it got to that?
You
point?
bet,
Yeah,
you bet.
that was a discussion too,
Problem
but
is,
they don't have enough
the
inspectors.
City
They
is
said,
responsive to the voters.
yeah,
The recent tornadic activity in Kentucky where the Amazon building collapsed, that was much newer construction. It's one of those concrete wall sections, those ginormous tilt wall constructions collapsed. So, yeah,
Where was that, Terry?
I've got
that was in
11.
Kentucky.
Illinois.
Mayfield,
Amazon.
Kentucky, just recently.
The tornado.
Yeah.
The wind was so strong it destroyed.
Right,
it.
right, but the whole wall just
Yeah,
collapsed.
it was a
Yeah.
really, really strong.
Sure.
Weather event. Yeah.
I'm keeping an eye on time. It's 11:14.
Oh, my goodness.
And that's okay, I know, it's clipping along. But I want to get through these. July, over 130 wildfires by lightning strikes burned through Western Canada following record-breaking heat wave in North America, over 600 deaths. Susan, do you remember that? Susan that's on Zoom, she's in Toronto, Canada.
I did. It was really terrible and really shocked the country for sure.
Did they attribute that to climate change?
Yes.
Said is it getting hotter in Canada overall?
Yeah, we had the highest recorded temperature this year in Canada.
Interesting. Okay, thank you. July 5, more than 1,000 Afghan soldiers fled Tajikistan after clashing with Taliban militants, and that was setting up the August takeover of the country by the Taliban. July 7th was the assassination of the Haiti president. We remember that, shot in his home after his security officer stood down when the home was invaded. So we're still finding out what happened, why that occurred. And they're saying was because of corruption, drug corruption, and other things that reached the highest levels. And then the Blue Origin delivered 4 crew members into space, including Amazon founder Bezos and his brother, an 82-year-old aviator who was at that time the oldest person to go into space until Bezos sent Captain Kirk into space. He was 90 years old. Then also in July was the Day of Haji. Women were permitted, I think this was Saudi Arabia, to attend the Haji event without a male guardian, provided they go in a trustworthy group. So maybe a baby step toward some emancipation for women in Saudi Arabia. And that was just a picture of the 3 types of head coverings they have there. The Summer Olympics were held in Tokyo. And then July 28th, the first direct observation of light from behind a black hole, confirming Einstein's theory of relativity. Wow. Is that a big deal, Ron?
I'd have to learn more on that one.
Okay.
From behind the black hole.
Light from behind the black hole. It's maybe escaping the black hole. This light's not supposed to do or something. Yeah. August, we remember this picture of the folks in Afghanistan trying to get onto the airplanes as they're leaving. But first there was the panel on climate change releasing a big report that said the effects of human-caused climate change are now widespread, rapid, and intensifying. So there's one more step there. And then August 15 was the Taliban taking Kabul, and the Afghan government surrendered, of course, as their president fled the country quickly. And the American officials said, we didn't think it was going to happen this fast, or we would have done things differently. Jim.
Going back to August 9th, I don't remember our church or any other denomination having any kind of significant response to that. And to my way of thinking, and of course, people are getting tired of me banging on the same drum all the time, but I guess I'm gonna keep doing it. This is a religious issue. This is a spiritual issue. We are obligated to take care of God's creation scripturally, and yet something like this comes out and the churches are not responsive. I don't understand this at all. I really do not. This is a religious issue. So just thought I'd bang the drum a little bit more.
That's
Keep
okay.
drumming,
Yep.
keep drumming.
That's right, okay. And then, of course, through those last 2 weeks of August was the Kabul airport attack, 182 people killed, including 13 service members. We remember that suicide bomb attack there. And then the US withdraws its last remaining troops from the airport, ending 20 years of operation in Afghanistan. And then we haven't heard much about it since then. Except I'm reminded that we have, as a church, we've just adopted an Afghan family that moved here, and we met with them last week for the first time. It was, I'm on that committee. It was really nice to meet with them, except they speak Pashto, one of the two main languages of the country. And we are having trouble finding an app or a device that can help us talk back and forth. So we're trying to help this family get their 5 children enrolled in schools and with this language barrier. And so.
So do any of them
That's a
speak
challenge.
English?
No, not any of them speak not a word of English.
Oh,
And
wow.
the father was a soldier in the Afghan forces working under the US, and that's why he had to escape and bring his 5 children under 12 here. And they're in an apartment in Aurora, don't speak a word of English. And so we're glad to be trying to help them.
I guess I'm leaping forward here, but there was a article in the news recently about the state of Afghanistan's economy is an absolute disaster. There are millions and millions of people. If things continue, millions of people will starve to death over this winter
Yes.
or freeze to death. And a lot of them are children. And most of it has to do with the fact that the support that Afghan economy was relying upon from several large agencies have been largely withdrawn, and they have none of that money anymore. And most of it is in, at least in concert with or at the direction of the United States as we pulled out. So the ramifications of our pulling out is going to impact millions of people. People die this winter.
And of course, the US officials are saying if we just give money to Afghanistan, to the Taliban, we don't think it's going to actually go to the people and help them because there's such corruption. So what's the answer? We don't know. September, El Salvador was the first country to accept Bitcoin as an official currency. And so, some US banks have started their own cryptocurrency. So that whole issue is going on, and we're trying to understand that. Is it really something of the future, or is it a passing fad? North Korea had been quiet, and then in September it shot off 2 ballistic missiles outside Japan's waters. Maybe just to say we're still here, pay attention to us. And then the Canadian federal election is held with Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party retaining a minority government. Susan, is it pretty stable, the government there? Has it been okay since the election?
It has been, but one of the parties that was influential before and garnered about 6 to 8% of the vote, the Green Party, has just imploded. So there's a lot of tumult in some of the other parties within Canada, including the Green Party.
Green Party. And German federal elections too, with, I believe, a conservative took over there. So things changing. October was more news on climate change. And so I saw this cartoon I thought was pretty good with the big wave of climate change, recession in front of that, and then COVID in front of that. It seemed like it was just one wave of issues after another. In October, the WHO endorsed the first malaria vaccine. So
That's huge around the world.
yes,
That is a huge global impact.
Colombia, a drug lord was captured. That continues in the Latin American countries. The drug trade is just terrible. Sudan military launches a coup against its government, another small country with a military takeover. And then we're in October. Global climate conference is held and the deal is agreed, which includes a phase down of coal power, a 30% cut in emissions by 2030, and plans to half deforestation, halt deforestation, and increase financial support. But of course, there was a lot of criticism that said, nice to have a conference, but there's no teeth to it. We can set those goals, but there's no enforcement. So where do we go from there? November, number of recorded deaths from COVID surpassed 5 million worldwide. SpaceX launched 4 people into space tourism, and NASA launched a asteroid redirection test to attempt to deflect an asteroid for the purpose of learning how to protect the Earth. Was that successful, Ron?
It's still on its way to the
Okay,
intended target. It's got many, many months to go, yeah.
many months to go. Are they going to shoot a laser at the, what are they going to do?
They're just gonna use a kinetic energy collision to try to deflect the pool ball just a little bit.
Move the pool ball. The way there have been movies about that,
Yeah.
haven't there? Yeah.
It
They
would use
explode
a
and
nuclear weapon in that thing rather than just the way that the rocket doesn't weigh that much.
Let's see, I don't know if they have a nuclear weapon on it. I'll have to read some more.
I don't think they do, yeah.
I think it's just kinetic energy.
that's what some of the
If
movies have
If you
shown.
do it far enough out, as you said, you have to only change the trajectory of micro fraction of an angular degree, and it will completely miss the Earth. So I mean, they're not looking to blow it up, they're just looking at it.
Yeah. Push it a little to the
Yeah.
side.
When is that supposed to hit?
I think it's still a year away.
Oh, okay.
I'll have to look at the exact.
And last month, November, WHO met with concerns over Omicron, the newest mutated variant in South Africa. And so we were really concerned about the lethality of that. And we've got about 5 minutes left, so we'll wrap up here and leave a little bit for additional comments. December, the US announced a diplomatic boycott of the Winter Olympics in Beijing coming up next month in response to China's human rights record. And there was a summit for democracy, a virtual summit hosted by the US to renew democracy at home and confront autocracies abroad. And we've just been talking about that in this class too, how many autocrats and rising dictators there are in the country. And then finally, Russia became the 5th country to surpass 10 million COVID cases, following behind US, India, Brazil, and the United Kingdom. Okay, well, what are your thoughts looking back? What did we miss also here? One that I thought of was race. You know, wasn't as big an issue this year as it was last year with the George Floyd cases, but it's still ongoing. In fact, in 2 weeks, Ron is going to present on the status of race in America. So we'll look a little deeper at that, but
There have been a couple of other very prominent cases that have gone to trial and
the
so.
Arbery case of the 3 guys in Georgia that ran down the jogger. Yes.
Rittenhouse verdict.
And the Rittenhouse verdict, yeah. had
So
racial
some really-
undertones,
uh-huh.
but, yeah, those were.
One item that was in the paper just this week, this is very important uh, to our country and the world, is the Senate sends $768 billion defense bill to the president. And I think it would be interesting to have a discussion some Sunday about the relative costs of military spending in the world. We spend about, our budget is about 11% is spent on the military, and China spends less than 2%, and Russia about a similar percentage of their budget. And the question is, are we spending too much money on the military? I think so. You know, when you get down to thinking about practicalities, how likely is it that China and the United States would get into a military confrontation? It would be ludicrous, because they're too dependent on each other in their economy. We're China's big customer. They don't want to alienate their biggest customer, which is a huge part in their economy. It would be like shooting themselves in the foot, you know. And wars affect the economies of a country greatly. And I'm having a senior moment, losing my train of thought.
To piggyback on that, I read a statistic this week that stated that military budget that passed with, nobody even really complained about it. Nobody
Exactly.
sneezed over it.
Yeah.
And that's for 1 year. And it is 4 times the budget of the Build Back Better, which will be
Right.
spread over 10 years.
Right, exactly.
Oh, okay.
To put it in
Yeah.
perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
The munitions industry in the country has way too much influence on our budget.
How much is really appropriate to stay strong? Carol, go ahead.
I'd
We're
like
gonna
to have
wrap
a
up.
discussion about our national debt.
Yes.
If we're not careful, I mean, we are gonna sink. We've got a major problem.
Mhm.
And cutting the military budget may be the first place to start there.
You know, there's reasons for the national debt, but I mean, factions have taken over common sense.
We also failed to mention the cases that have been presented before the Supreme Court, which will not be decided or opinions issued until next year.
Thank you, Lynn.
Abortion, is that what you're referring to?
Yes, among others. And how the makeup of the court is influencing the decisions that are coming out of that court. I think it's
Important.
Sometime just
important.
how it's changed, what's
Not
coming
just
up.
the Supreme Court, it's the other courts that also have
Oh,
had judges put in that is influencing.
The appeals
decision.
courts.
I'd like to have a discussion on open borders.
That's
Yeah.
another good one.
That's
Of course. That was a
That's
big
huge
story.
one. I mean, that's gonna affect every,
We didn't even touch on that.
yeah.
What was that? I missed that. What was that?
Do a class on immigration, open borders, especially the south border with Mexico.
Total effects on, over periods of time on the economy. What will happen, how they're going to be assimilated, will they
Yes.
assimilate?
Yes.
We've got a huge amount of illegal trafficking. They're releasing people from their prisons.
Yes.
Concerning immigrants coming to this country, it used to be that someone coming in had to have a sponsor, you know, that guaranteed keeping them from becoming a public charge. Jane and I, we sponsored a couple from India, and they became American citizens, responsible citizens. He was a counselor in a high school, and she was a nurse, and they both, you know, contributed to society and were good American citizens. But the sponsorship is important, you know. Well, what are these people gonna do when they flood into the country? They have to, fit into the economy.
Right, right. Yes,
I
ma'am, go ahead.
listened to the governor of Texas last night, and they are building a wall for all across the border with Texas. A big high metal wall
Okay.
with special, behind it, there's electrical stuff.
Mhm.
And they have set the money aside to pay for all this because they have found that the federal government isn't doing anything. And they cannot afford all these people come into Texas and bring illness and, drugs. The drugs, he was talking about how
Human
much of
trafficking,
that
it goes
stuff.
on and on.
Yeah, unbelievable.
I can't remember where I read this, and I was trying to remember. But there was an email or something that came to me that said that there was a lot of very conservative Christian groups were complaining loudly about the crisis on our southern border at the same time as they were talking about the two refugees that went to Bethlehem. And so,
That's a whole different story.
Yeah, so what the
and I can't
Christian
remember
perspective
where it
would
came
be
from. I
on
was
this, yes.
trying to find it in my
Yeah.
head, but I couldn't.
Yeah.
Immigrating into Egypt.
I
Okay,
think it's a
Carol and
good-
then Brett,
yeah,
and we're gonna wrap up.
I think that it's good to see the states asserting themselves
Yeah,
against the power of the government.
yeah.
The power should remain with the states. And I love it when the states start doing their thing.
Okay.
Yeah, and
Good
Texas
thought.
has quite a border there.
It's a Lone
Yes.
Star state for a reason.
Lone Star State, Brett.
Oh, I did talk about mandates and whether that's gone back and forth in the courts again.
Yes.
And I think Governor Polis said, do what if you don't have it by now and you get sick, that's your problem. So
Yeah.
I thought that was a different thing than Governor Polis.
Different country.
James
Different
Webb
states.
Telescope goes up this week. When is it, Friday?
They're now saying New Year's Eve
New
day,
Year's or,
the morning of New Year's Eve.
okay.
5:20 a.m. Eastern, no, 5:20 a.m. our time, Mountain Time,
It's not.
Christmas Eve.
Christmas Eve.
Christmas Eve morning.
I'm sorry, what's gonna happen
The-
now?
They're gonna launch the James Webb Space
Oh, yeah.
Telescope from French Guiana.
He worked on it for 10 years. That's
you?
why he's.
So get up early, get on your Nest channel by before 5:20 morning of New Year's
They
Eve.
gotta get it right this time. Can't send out a team to fix it like they did the
That's
Hubble.
That's for sure.
Way too far out.
Yes, Ron's a retired engineer and worked on the software for the Hubble telescope,
Oh,
which
James
is,
Webb.
or for the James Webb, which I heard an interview yesterday and they were describing, it's gonna be the first ever telescope that will be able to look back at radiation of the first the galaxies created after the Big Bang. So it not only will take pictures of farther out in the universe, but it will identify from the very first moments of the Big Bang.
Yeah. We're gonna target a lesson for that in maybe February or something.
Good.
And maybe include some information about the concern about space debris. The
You
debris
mentioned that.
hitting our
Yeah.
all of our
Yeah, good stuff.
satellites and that kind of thing, taking us out, taking out our connectivity and,
Yes. That's up there too. Okay, it's 11:37. We need to wrap up. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you. Lord. Happy birthday, yes.
Thank you. Merry Christmas.
Christmas, everybody.
Nothing next 2 weeks, right?
Nothing next week. We're gonna take next week off, but then the week after, January 2, it's gonna be a race. State race in America.
Okay.
You did it, Steve. That's a good wrap.
Thanks for coming, Mike.
Steve got one.